Hi everyone, it's Laura here for Studio Katia, and in today's video I'm going to show you how to create a summer floral card using the Aloha stamp set. I started off by stamping and coloring my images. Here I'm showing you the stamp set. Again, this is the Aloha stamp set and it was released in March 2019. And as you can see, I already went ahead. I stamped my images with black ink on Nina Solar White 110 pounds cardstock, and I'm going to color them with my Spectrum Noir markers. I wanted to create sort of a two-color type of floral, and this is something that I hadn't done before, so I went ahead and off camera tried to color one of the flowers. And because I was happy with the result, I decided to use the same technique to color the rest of the florals. So what I did is I started with my lightest markers. This would be the PP1 marker for my pink centers and the CT1 marker for the tip of the petals. And I used those markers to block in the areas that I wanted to have those colors. And then I went ahead and used progressively darker markers to build depth in those areas. So for the pinks, I started with PP1, then I added PP2, and I am using some flicking motions to create some texture in the flowers. And as I go and use darker and darker markers, I make sure that the areas that I cover are smaller, so that I really create a gradient of color which builds depth and dimension. So again, for the pinks I used PP1, PP2, PP4 and PP6, and for my yellows I used CT1, CT2, CT4 and GB3. And to make sure that everything is blended out nicely, I'm going lightest to darkest and then back to lightest. So at this point I am applying the GB3, which is my darkest marker, and after that I will go back with the CT4 and then with the CT1. The video is sped up, but you can always use the YouTube tools to slow it down and watch the coloring process in more detail. For the second flowers I used the same color combinations, but because I wanted the end result to be a little bit lighter and a little bit more delicate, I guess, than what I had just colored right now, I decided not to extend the flicks that I am applying now with my lightest markers quite as far, so I am leaving quite a large area in the center of the petals white, so that I'm able in the end to get a lighter result. This time around I was a little bit more confident with my coloring, so after having blocked the areas that I wanted to color using my lightest markers, I went back in directly with my darkest shade, which is the PP6. I then blended that out first with the PP4 and then with the PP2 and finally with the PP1 again. And same with the yellows, I started directly with the GB3, I darkened up the very tip of the petals and then I blended everything out towards the white areas, first with the CT4 marker and then with the CT2 and CT1 markers. And I don't use my alcohol ink markers very often to color in florals. I have started to do that recently a little bit more, but used to gravitate towards watercolors or watercolor markers, colored pencils. But this time I wanted a really bright card that really screamed summer and I wanted to bring out the beauty of these stamps, so I decided to use my Spectrum Noir markers, and I have to say that I am quite happy with the result. Off camera, I also colored the smaller flowers as well as the center of the flowers, and then I moved on and started coloring the leaves. I will show you the coloring only for this larger image because the rest is basically the same. And for my leaves, I used 3 different color combinations, but 2 sets of markers, and I will explain it to you in a little bit. Anyway, for this first leaf here, I used GT3, GT2 and GT1. These greens have a higher percentage of blue in them, And I am shading the leaves by keeping the centers darker and having the outer portions lighter. And as always, I am adding a couple of layers of color to get more contrast and increase the sense of dimension. For these more elongated leaves, I decided to use markers in the CG family. These greens have more yellow to them than the ones that I used on the leaves I colored so far. And I thought that adding a couple of different tones of greens on my florals would bring a little bit more variation and interest on the card. Also in this case, the darkest portions of the leaves are the ones in the center, and I have my highlights at the edges of the leaves, and I used CG4, CG2 and CG3. To create a third shade of green, rather than using another set of markers, I used the glazing technique. So basically what I did is I went over that leaf in the bottom center of the main image with one layer of CG2 marker. This toned down the blue-greens that I had previously used and created a third shade. And I'm using this technique to color also the remaining leaves. So I'm going to first coat them with the CG2 marker, and then I'm going to color them with my GT3, GT2 and GT1 color combination. I die cut all the images with the coordinating dies to the Studio Katia Aloha stamp set. And then I figured that I had so much color variation in my leaves, but the flowers were all colored the same. So I decided to bring a little bit of extra interest to the flowers as well by using again the glazing technique. This time what I did is I added some yellow to the center of the flowers with a CT2 marker and some pink to the tip of the flowers using a PP2 marker. Here I'm just deepening the shadows a little bit because that CT2 had bleached the color a bit too much. I repeated the same steps also on one of the flowers in the larger image. And by using the glazing technique, basically what I did is I created a shade of orange, which brought in some color variation and some more interest to my card. So just to recap, I have two flowers colored as I showed at the beginning and two flowers that I colored with the glazing technique. I then went ahead and created a window for the front of my card using some white cardstock and two of the dies in the Studio Katia Darling Ribbon and Frames dies. And then I moved on and started creating my sunset sky. I have some Bristol Smooth cardstock over which I'm going to do ink blending with Distress inks. I wanted a really bright sky with pinks and oranges, and I wanted it to look as if it was almost night already. So I started from quite a dark blue Distress ink, which is the chipped sapphire. I then blended that out with the salty ocean and then moved on to the picked raspberry and the spiced marmalade. To add even more contrast to my sky, I darkened up the top edge with Distress ink in Black Soot, and then I blended it out again with chipped sapphire and salty ocean. I created some stars by diluting Perfect Pearls in 3 different colors and then using a paintbrush to create some droplets on the sky. And I used Perfect Pearls in the colors Perfect Pearl, Perfect Gold and Perfect Copper. And I love using Perfect Pearls to create stars on my sunsets or night sky backgrounds because they add a very nice shimmer to the project. And at this point everything was ready, so I could go ahead and start assembling everything. I glued down the window front on the sky background. I made sure that the Perfect Pearls were completely dry before doing so, and then I started creating my floral composition. I raised the main image on one layer of foam tape and I adhered that to the bottom left of my card front. And then I completed my floral arrangement by gluing down the individual flowers and leaves using some liquid glue. So those are glued down flat on my card front. And as always, I first played around with the arrangement of the flowers a little bit, and then I went ahead and glued everything down. Because I wanted even more shimmer on this card, I coated the flowers and the leaves with a Spectrum Noir clear overlay pen. And rather than covering the entire image, I decided to only coat the shadow areas, so the centers of the flowers and the centers of the leaves. I embossed my sentiment with white embossing powder over a strip of black cardstock, and then I added a few sequins. These are from the Summer Fusion Sequin Mix by Studio Katia, and they were just perfect for these cards because the colors worked just great with the palette I had on my card today. And I'm using a duo picker and the Studio Katia glue to pick up the sequins and adhere them to the front of my card. I couldn't stop and I had to decorate the inside of the card too. So I'm stamping the larger image in the Studio Katia Aloha stamp set using Distress Oxide in Spiced Marmalade. And then I used some more stamps in the Aloha stamp set by Studio Katia to stamp the sentiment Sending Sunshine with black ink. And here is the final result. I really love all the shimmer on the card, and these floral images are really beautiful. And this bold color palette really makes me think about summer. And that's it for today. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope I inspired you to create with the Studio Katia Aloha stamp set. Don't forget to subscribe for more inspiration. Thank you all so much for stopping by, and have a great day.